Hello, and welcome to Stories from the View, a podcast from the Pleasant View Senior Center in East Longmeadow, Massachusetts. On this podcast, we invite East Longmeadow residents to tell us their stories about their lives and events. And today's guest is Brian Falk. He is the former senior captain of the fire department in town. He's worked in emergency management here in town and is currently on the Disability Commission here in town. So, here is your host, Ed Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Eric. So, Brian, it was nice to meet you this morning.
Same here. Good to meet everybody involved.
I want to talk about the emergency services experience that you've had. We've chatted a little bit about that already, but and also the Disability Commission that you're on. But first of all, I asked you before this started, when did you first come to East Longmeadow?
I first came to East Longmeadow. I was born in East Longmeadow.
And that's,
as I like to say, born in East Longmeadow. I lived in East Longmeadow all my 71 years to date.
wow. So you've seen some changes here in town, I guess.
I've seen a lot of changes. I've seen a lot of issues. I wish we still had town government the way it was because it was the purest form of government at the time.
Mm-hmm. The good old days, huh?
Yes. How can you beat having a town meeting where you can fight your fight in front of the public and the elected officials and express yourself freely?
So your family was from East Longmeadow?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, my mother was from East Longmeadow. My father was from East Longmeadow.
Wow. So how was it that you got involved with the fire department?
I don't really have a clear-cut answer to that. My father was a police sergeant. My understanding, he was the first police sergeant appointed to the local department. And I wanted to follow in his footsteps originally. And he said, he had no objection to that. He said, just don't do it in this town because it was too political. And somewhere along the line, something changed my mind. I went to the fire side of the emergency service.
Okay, and so you were with the fire department for how many years?
Well, I was appointed to, at the time, the call department, because there were two portions to the department, call and full-time. On July 1st, 1971, at the age of 19. And then I was appointed to the full-time staff January 1, 1979, for 35 years.
Wow. So you've seen a lot of changes there, I would imagine, in the fire service, right?
Well, when I first got appointed, all the trucks were open cab.
Mm-hmm.
The ladder truck was the most dangerous spot to ride onto a call because you had to ride on the turntable. So you were exposed in the weather. In the wintertime, if you were up there, by the time you got on scene, you were kind of stiff and had to get warmed up and worked out so you could go to work. Until I decided to sit behind the control tower for the aerial. At least that gave me a bit of a windshield.
Mm-hmm.
But I started on the ladder. I went to an engine and back to the ladder when I got appointed captain.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So how did that lead to emergency services position, being the emergency services director? Is that what you were for the town?
Well, while I was on the fire department, I was actually deputy director with a friend of mine who was director, named Frank Morsino. His father was actually good friends with my father. I don't know if that had any connection, but that's how the two of us grew up and hit it off. But after I retired, he had to step down, and I became emergency management director for a couple of years.
So what role, what do you do as emergency services director?
Well, emergency services or emergency management, think of it as the old civil defense. The only thing is civil defense became all-encompassing to all types of disasters and emergencies. We were the supporting organization for the emergency services such as police and fire and DPW. And at this point, I'd like to mention that DPW isn't considered an emergency service in a lot of people's thinking. But in a time of a disaster, they are suppliers of a lot of materials that you need for whatever ever the situation is.
Mhm. Okay. So, were there any major events that took place while you were in that position? Anything that
Well, while I was deputy director,
Yes, ma'am.
some people might remember, as we called it, Snowtober, the October snowstorm that came down in multiple inches
Mhm.
when the trees still had all leaves on them.
Right.
Mhm.
So that was the first time we opened a shelter, which became Birchland Park Middle School. So that was a challenge. National Grid came in that morning and said, "What do you need?" And we said, "Well, we could use some cots and blankets and things." And we said, the president of the company said, "I think we got those." So they ended up supplying all those materials for us, which we were more than thankful for because we had no way of getting a hold of them in an emergency.
Mhm.
Everybody used to require or rely on the American Red Cross, and if you had a multiple community event, there's no way the Red Cross is going to be able to take care of you.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, the Red Cross. Yeah, but they were stretched thin, I would
Right.
imagine. Yeah. Hmm. How long did that event go on? How long was the shelter open?
The shelter was open for 5 days, if I remember right. I think it was more closer to 7 days before the National Grid, the electric company, managed to get everything up and running and everybody had power back.
Wow.
We did learn the hard way that the emergency generator at the middle school was not up to full capacity because it
Mhm.
died at one point.
Oh, jeez.
So I used my connections and I contacted the state emergency management office for a backup generator, which got wheeled in by the Department of Fire Services. In the meantime, the town electrician and the electrical inspector got the one we had up and running again. And I said, "Well, I don't care what happens. We are not giving up that generator. Now we have it on site." And it's just as well I didn't because a couple mornings later, I got an emergency phone call from Bluebird Estates. Their generator crashed. And I said, "Well, let me make a couple phone calls and we'll try and get you back up and running while you get your current unit repaired." So I got a hold of the DPW. The DPW transported to the scene. Their electricians, the town electricians, got it wired into their building, so they're back up and running. Because at that point, the only thing they had any heat on was the central dining room.
Oh my gosh. Wow. So we talked a little bit before about MRC and CERT. Could you just kind of explain what those two organizations are? Because they are two volunteer organizations that people, some of the listeners, might want to get involved in. And so tell us what those two organizations do.
Well, as you noted already, they're both volunteer organizations. CERT is an acronym for CERT Community Emergency Response Team, which is civilian, as we already mentioned, civilian volunteers responding in an emergency upon call up.
Mhm.
They receive training in 14 different fields. The other one, the MRC, that's another acronym. It's short for Medical Reserve Corps. At one point, they were trying to regionalize that. I don't know if they ever did, but I didn't think that was necessarily a good idea to have the possibility of our MRC volunteers going into other communities because we might need them in our own community.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So we've got MRC, CERT. Those are organizations that someone could volunteer for that provide support to kind of backup support to the emergency services, police, fire department, DPW, if there's an emergency of some sort.
Correct.
I know there's another October snowstorm or.
Correct. In
Yeah,
fact, our CERT team, when I was running it, we were asked to get training through the local mass emergency management office in Agawam to run their emergency operations center.
Mhm.
We were one of the regional CERT teams that was asked to work on that. And the feeling of the regional director at the time was, if there's a disaster in Western Massachusetts, all his people are going to be out in the field. So he needed somebody to run their regional operations center to communicate with Framingham and handle incoming calls.
Okay. Okay. You mentioned Framingham. What is happening there?
Framingham is where the main office of the State Emergency Management Office is headquartered.
Okay.
I attended a couple training sessions down there, and they have a very elaborate emergency operations center down there, which oversees the whole state. And then there are regional ones, and 4 regional ones or 3 regional ones throughout the Commonwealth in addition.
Yeah. So going back in time a little bit, the fire department, I know where the firehouse is now. I mean, I'm only up here 5 years, so I don't have much experience in East Longmeadow. Where was the firehouse back when you first joined?
Well, there's actually been, the current one is actually the 4th one. The first one was actually a couple sheds behind the town hall where they stored hand-pulled hose carts.
Oh my God.
The next one is a brick building on the center playgrounds off Shaker Road across from Coffee Time.
Okay.
That was the second.
Oh, right.
That was the second one. That was built in 1924, 25 era, and they were building that because they needed someplace to house the town's first motorized piece of fire apparatus, which was the 1924 Seagrape pumper.
Wow.
And then it got to a point where that wasn't big enough. So combined, as they would call it now, a safety complex was built on Maple Street, where between where Walgreens and
about where Walgreens
the library is now.
Yeah.
Actually, just to the left of the library, that's actually Central Street. On the opposite side of Central Street was the station.
Okay.
And we ended up moving out of there after the police moved into the complex on Summers Road. They remodeled the old building entirely for the fire department. And then when that became too small, they built the new station up on Summers Road next to the police department. And one of the issues at the time was we had this new ladder truck, tandem axle ladder truck. And those who have been in town might remember there was a large L painted on the asphalt outside of one of the doors. Well, that was a notice for the driver. If you were responding to a call, you couldn't turn before that, or you'd wipe out the back corner of the truck. And if you turned too far beyond that, you'd end up in the library.
Jeez.
So there were a number of times where one of our issues was it was against the library. It was designated a fire lane. Well, it was designated a fire lane because when the ladder truck came out, it was in that fire lane trying to get out into the center. And there were a number of times where people got actually pushed back out onto Maple Street to let the ladder truck get out and go to a call.
Oh my gosh. So what about the ambulance service? I mean, that's part of the fire department, I guess, right? I mean, is that?
Well, originally, when I was growing up, the police department actually ran it, and there wasn't really much. It was basic first aid. The town did have an ambulance. It was strictly for transport, basically, to the local closest hospital in Springfield. So the police department ran it. There was no such thing at the time as EMT or paramedic. The closest we came before I retired was we were doing what they called paramedic engine company responses. We would get dispatched along with the ambulance, but most of the time the ambulance was out of town. So the on-duty crew for the fire department would respond with an engine and all our medical gear. And we would take over before the ambulance got there in most cases. So if I was shift captain, we had one EMT at the time. I would tell him, don't worry about bringing any equipment in. Once we get on scene, you get inside, you start doing the evaluation. We will bring all the gear.
Okay.
But long after I retired, everybody in the region was going ambulance service because it was a big money raiser, a big fundraiser. It kept funds and things that in town for town use.
Okay. So today, I mean, the ambulance is part of the fire department. I mean, it's part of and the fire. I mean, the fire personnel are trained to some extent.
From what I understand, everybody has to be at least EMT when they get hired, but I'm assuming because I've been retired for 17 years.
Oh, okay.
That
yeah, that's a while. Yeah, things
they have to in a set period of time. I would assume probably a year, receive their paramedic certification. I know of one person right now who's going through his clinicals at the hospital for his paramedic certification. So I'm assuming there's a 1 year time frame from the time they get appointed.
Okay. So, switching topics, you joined the Disability Commission here in town, which I believe is newly formed.
I'm not sure when it was actually put in place by the town council, but I read an article in the Reminder about the commission and how new it was, and there was an opening, and I wanted to get back into doing things for the community, so I applied for it, and I was out of the out of the 6 members that were already there, I became number 7. That filled the commission, and now we're trying to get things adopted so we can get things up and running. And
what's it about? What is its goal? What's its mission?
Basically, it's an advisory commission. We will, once things are up and running and we have documents that we can work with, we will be working with other town government, town departments and commissions on what may or may not need to be done for their properties at the current time and in the future.
So to make them more accessible.
Correct.
Okay.
It could be something as simple as putting in some type of ramp or handicap facilities in a newly remodeled bathroom or something. Whatever comes up, we're still working on the operational setup in a particular mission statement and operating procedures.
I see.
So we have our guidelines in place. So if somebody steps down, somebody else comes in to take over, they have something to review.
Okay. So, so you've been a fireman, you've been emergency service director, commissioner on this disability commission. Other town activities that you've been involved in?
Well, as I said before we started this today, I actually started the community emergency response team. It started a little later than it could have because at the time there were no trained personnel or trained instructors throughout the Commonwealth. So finally, a year or 2 later, after we started trying to set it up, State Emergency Management hosted a training session. So I was able to attend the training session, become a certified trainer for CERT. And then MRC came in. I ended up getting pulled into the MRC, which was kind of funny because as I said earlier to you, that I used to get asked about responding, and I said, well, I'll probably, as director or assistant or deputy director at the time for emergency management, I'd probably be already on scene. So I don't know about getting called in because I'll just be meeting you there when you show up. I've also became involved with the 4th of July Parade Committee or Independence Day Parade Committee, whatever term you want to use for it. I was on that board for many years. I'm still helping to run the parade the day of, but I'm no longer on the committee. I needed to step down and do some other things.
Yeah, it's a great parade, by the way. Yeah, I've really enjoyed it since I've been up here.
We try hard. We had two very, very well-known people in town, Joseph Scanlon and Marshall Moriarty, who were the directors of the committee at the time. And one year they turned around and said, we need people to actually marshal the parade. And it was on the fire department. I said, well, I don't need to march in the parade, so why don't you just use me? And at that time, we were over at the old Burtson Park School on Hanward Hill, and there were no bicycles, there were no motor scooters to get around. So we were literally running from one point to another to make sure certain groups are in the right places and things are stepping off right. And then it just got worked into being on the committee itself and actually helping to put it together.
There's a lot involved.
Oh yes. The parade is run, as everybody should know, on July 4th. Well, actually by July 5th, a lot of the music and things are already booked for the following year.
Wow.
So like Macy's and a lot of the other parades, the committee starts working on it the day after.
Wow. So what else do you do? What else? What are you said something before about being busy with some other things like?
Well, I stepped down. I right after I retired. Unfortunately, my wife was diagnosed with cancer. She managed to survive for 8 years and passed away in 2014. And a couple years later, I met up with somebody that I'd known at that point for about 50 years. And it was funny because I had her mother from my junior high school music teacher.
Okay.
So in 2016, we got connected, and she's my fiance now.
Oh wow, nice.
For 7 years at this point.
Wow.
But I had no idea I had ended up dating her, going out with my music teacher's daughter.
That's oh my gosh.
So now between us, we've got a blended family of grandchildren. She's got 3 grandsons. I've got a grandson and 2 granddaughters.
Wow, nice.
Yes.
That's nice. Yeah. So is she from East Long Meadow as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh
Okay.
yes. And I'm starting to feel old with my grandchildren because I held my 2 granddaughters when they were first born, and now next year my oldest one graduates from high school, and she's got a very nice boyfriend, and then her younger sister is, I don't know how this came about, but she's in a trade school taking fire science.
Well, I wonder.
Well, it kind of caught us off guard because we had no idea she was doing that line until I got a photo by email of her in firefighting gear. And I'm going, what is this all about? And she ended up telling us that she had enrolled in a fire science class at the local trade school where they are in Maine. And she says, I said, why'd you do that? She says, I want to follow in your footsteps.
That's nice. That is nice. So, any hobbies? Any? Do you go fishing? Do you?
I used to love bass fishing. We always did catch and release. We had a good time. A friend of mine had the boat. We used to go out to Congamon on Sundays. And this one Sunday, apparently they had an overnight fishing tournament out there. So we got his boat into the water. He says, "Where you want to start?" I said, "Well, I know you probably want to run the boat up the lake and warm the engine up and stuff. So then why don't we come back down behind this restaurant over here, because there's a flat sandbar underneath, and there was a guy fishing over there." And I used to always like these yellow chartreuse spinner baits. So we did that, and we ran up the lake, warmed things up, and turned around and came back down and set up. And I think it was my 7th or 8th cast that morning. I got a fish. And right across from us on the other side of the sandbar was one of the guys in the fishing tournament. And we're looking over, and he's keeping real close eye because we just showed up that morning, and we've already got a fish, and apparently he hasn't had a bite yet. So he's trying to figure out what the heck's going on. But the other thing I've been involved with for a long time is I love golf.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
So many years now, probably 10 or 12 at this point, I've been involved with the senior golf league on Wednesday mornings, senior men's league.
Okay.
Some of the guys when I first got on I was the youngest guy there, and their eyesight wasn't necessarily too good, and I would get up and tee off, and one of the other guys in the force would ask a different guy, "Boy, it sounded good. Do you see where it went?" He says, "No, he hits it so high that I lost it in the clouds."
So where do you play?
We play predominantly at Franconia, which is one of the city courses off Dwight Road.
Oh, okay.
But we play 18 holes. We usually have good weather, eight or nine foursomes.
Wow. Nice. So no, I mean that's it for the year now, right?
Yeah, unfortunately. Unfortunately, I used to go down south and bring my clubs for a week or two.
Okay.
Either Myrtle Beach or Florida, but my cousin in Florida is no longer capable of playing.
Mm-hmm.
He'd like to, but at this point he's not able to do it.
So, well, it's been a pleasure hearing your stories. Thank you for being here today. I don't know if there's any last thing that you might want to share with our listeners.
Well, I mentioned to Aaron, I don't know what I'm going to do with it. I started writing a book earlier this year.
Yeah, glad you brought that up.
It's basically about my life and what I went through with all the changes with the fire service and so forth. I did see all the changes when I got on with the fire department. We were wearing metal helmets, long heavy rubber coats, and long rubber boots. I saw all the transition to the shorter boots, the bunker pants as they're called, the shorter coats, the lighter weight helmets. When I got on, breathing apparatus, as it's now called really didn't exist. So I saw all that technology come into play. I was given charge one time. We were going to change over to newer SCBA or self-contained breathing apparatus. So the chief that I was working under gave me the job of evaluating all the ones that were on the market. And we were going to the Springfield Smokehouse a couple times that month. So I had to go. I would usually go once during that time frame. I ended up having to go both times because I had to try out a couple different types of breathing apparatus, and then write up an evaluation and recommendations to what brand to go with. And he did the same thing when it became a case of having to refill our cylinders. We had what they call the cascade system, which was a series of eight large steel bottles for filling. It got to the point where we were exceeding the capabilities with that, so we had to get a compressor. So he gave me the job of looking at the different brands, picking out a manufacturer, and writing a specification. Go ahead.
So I'm just going to say, your book is going to cover your experience with the fire department.
Yes.
Okay.
I did send what I had written as of this last summer to a niece of mine who's works at a college to look it over. In fact, she's the one that got me going on the idea of writing it because she wrote one about my aunt and uncle.
Oh, good. Oh, that's nice.
And she liked what I had done so far. I said, well, just to let you know, it's not done yet. I've got quite a bit more to add because as I keep coming up with ideas or remember things that I might want to put in there, I make a note so I can gather up the information. And when I get a chance to sit down and work on it, do
So
whatever I need to enter.
when do you think you'll be finished with it?
I'm not really sure because the list I've got right now has got probably 10 more items I'm
Okay.
thinking about putting in there.
It's a lot of work.
Yes.
Writing. Yeah. Yeah.
But I've got one great source for all my fire information because I remember some of the addresses and approximate dates. But he was a guy that's still on the department when I was on the department. So I just call him up and say, "Hey, friend, buddy, can you look up a particular call for me? I need a little more information."
Good. Good. Well, that's good.
You know,
Well,
can
we're
I-
gonna have to have you back
Yeah,
when
when the
your
book.
book is completed,
Yeah,
and you can announce it here on the podcast.
Yeah.
Well,
And
my niece asked me if this is gonna be something that's gonna get published for people to obtain or family. And I said, well, probably at the moment, probably mostly family. I'm thinking, but that's too far down the road to think about at the moment.
So it's been
You know,
great. Thank
yeah,
you. Thank
you know,
Brian.
can I just ask you a question, Brian?
Sure.
And it might be something that you're going to be putting in your book, but the most challenging fire your most challenging call during your career at the fire department? I mean, one that I always think about was that fire at Bluebird Estates.
Bluebird Estate, by the time the fire took place at Bluebird Estates, I was retired.
You were, okay. Okay.
I retired at 50, I was able to retire at 54 because of my years of service.
Mhm.
And so I wasn't there for that one. In fact, I was working for Rocky's Hardware at the time.
Okay.
And my manager that morning said, "Did you hear about the fire?" I said, "What fire?"
Mhm.
Because I didn't even see the news that morning.
Mhm.
But depends on what you call figure is challenging. I was like I said earlier, there were two factions to the fire department when I got on. There was an on-call group, which is basically like volunteers, but you got paid an hourly rate when you responded to calls and drills.
Right.
And then there was a foreman on duty staff Monday through Friday, 8 to 4. Well, I was already on call when this happened. We got called out it was around 5 or 5:30 in the morning on New Year's Eve morning, December 31st, 1978, for a 5-fatality house fire. That's how my full-time career started, with dealing with the after effects of that call.
Mhm.
But then there were a few others. One of the longest ones I went on, we actually responded to Palmer, Mass.
Mhm.
They've been all the departments that make up the town of Palmer have been fighting a large mill fire for the day, and the water supply was getting low. So you put a call in for outside departments and tankers to augment the town system because the supply had gotten so low they were having water pressure problems at Wing Memorial Hospital. So we showed up. It was my driver said, "How do you want to go?" And we said, "Well, we could go a long way over the hills, or we can go the straight flatter way." So we went out Parker Street through Springfield, through 16 acres to Boston Road out to Palmer, right past the Wilbraham Fire Station and the 16 acres fire station in Springfield.
Mhm.
To get to the scene, we got to the scene, and the Palmer chief asked our chief, "Where's your ladder truck?" We said, "What ladder truck?" We didn't get a request for a ladder truck. So we showed up with a pumper.
Mhm.
And he
Sure.
said, "Can you draft out of the Quabog River?" And we said, "Sure, we can draft out of the Quabog River." So we ended up setting up our operations, but we got stuck when we first tried to set up operations because the ground was too soft. So they had to pull us out with a bucket loader tractor,
Oh, my.
firm up the ground for us, and then we were able to get in close enough to the river so we could set it up. That was the longest call that I've ever worked.
Yeah.
I ended up being out there overnight till about I think it was maybe 7 o'clock the next morning when the chief's car showed up with somebody else to relieve me and the driver. And on the way back, the driver says, the chief gave me orders for you that you to go home and get some sleep. Because I had been up for almost 24 hours at the time. And he says, I turned around and I said, well, good, because if he didn't, I was going to do that anyways. But so I went home. I started going to. I had gone to bed, and then about 3 o'clock that afternoon, I got a phone call from the station. The truck's on the way back. Can you come in and help us put it back in service? So I said, yeah, sure, I'll be up shortly. I got up there, back on the clock again. Mm-hmm. While we're waiting for them to get back in town, we get a call for the house fire right next to where I'm living now. Oh. And we showed up. We showed up. I was in charge of the first engine. I told my guys, I said, stand by. Let me go in and check things out, and I'll let you know what we need. Well, we found out the owner was a Springfield firefighter, and I'm looking at the wall. And he says, I think I got a chimney fire, and the wall is turning brown. I said, you haven't got a chimney fire. You got a fire in the wall. So knowing we were going to have to tear things apart and we might have to take burning material outside, we stretched the hose line into the house and stretched the hose line outside the house. Ladder truck showed up. We gave them the job of doing the work on the first floor while my guys went upstairs. My two guys that rode with me on the engine caught it just as it was getting above the second floor. Mm. So we stopped it early. There was a little bit of damage that we caused and the fire caused, but the guy was still able to live in the house.
But it was electrical?
No, he had used the fireplace. Apparently there was a problem with the fireplace and allowed the fire or sparks to get into the wall outside of the brick enclosure.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so get those chimneys inspected then.
Yes, yes, particularly if you use them quite often.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for being here, Brian. We really appreciate you coming in, and we're going to want to hear about the book when that comes up.
Well, we can at that time we can also expand on the changes in the fire service and things that locally took place and nationally.
Okay. Yeah. No, that
sounds good, Brian. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for coming in.
You're welcome.
All right. So thanks. And that wraps up another episode of Stories from the View. We'd like to thank Brian Falk for coming in today. The Stories from the View podcast is available on the LCAT 01028 channel on YouTube, and we're also on Spotify. If you have a story that you'd like to share on the program, contact Pleasant View Senior Center Director Aaron Kobler by stopping by the Pleasant View Senior Center or by calling Aaron 413-525-5436, extension 1401, or you can send an email to Aaron, aaron.kobler@eastlongmeadowma.gov. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Stories from the View.